Okay, so we're going to start the 1099 process webinar. We're going to go over what's new. We're going to verify some setup, look at ways to review data, how to fix any possible errors, importing, changing any records. And this comes into play if you were a mid-year implementation, and then printing and submitting, and then we'll follow up with some questions at the end. Here's a little cheat sheet that users can use as they go through this process. And I am going to be going through the details through this webinar. And I'm also going to be providing some detailed instructions that include snapshots of screens and then just more detailed information so users are able to utilize this, the webinar, the PowerPoint, and any other supplemental resources that we're providing from the IRS. So what's new? There's a few things that the system changed, or that was changed in schoolAbility. One is within the setup, users are able to input the submitter information directly on the UI. And we'll go through how to do that and how to review that information. Users are able to save files to the desktop. And there's this new feature for TIN verification that users can submit to the IRS with the TIN matching program. Okay, so review setup. Some of the things that users are going to want to do initially is they want to make sure that the most updated version of the software is installed. We're going to want to look at the organization record to make sure the contact information is updated and correct. We're going to want to review the vendor records and the account component records. So to load the software, or to identify what version of the software is uploaded, users can click on Help, About, and view this information here where it says software version. So all schoolAbility systems that we are in charge of have been updated. Now let's look at the organization record. To do that, you're going to click on System, Setup, and Organization. Just keep in mind that this is permission-based, so not all users have access to this feature. And let's go ahead and go directly to the system. I am on a Scramble database. So to do that, we're going to actually click on the org, click on System, Setup, Organizations. And within section 5 right here, this is where users are going to be able to make sure that the submitter name is inputted. And where this comes into play is if you're on a system that has multiple orgs that are reporting separately, and you have an outside entity who's submitting on their behalf, you can input this information here where it has submitter name and so forth. And then you're going to want to make sure that the address and contact information have been updated.
So, Jolene, may I interrupt just a moment?
Sure.
So in DMS's situation, they will do the 1099s on behalf of the school, so they would put their name in there?
On the submitter name, yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, now we're going to want to look at the vendor records. And this is what is going to initiate whether that vendor receives a 1099 at year end, of course, if they meet the $600 threshold. And to view records, the vendor record setup, you're going to want to go to Finance, Purchasing, and Vendors. And I've identified the fields here, which are highlighted in red, that are related to the 1099. So we're going to go ahead and go to that section within the software. And I'm going to go ahead and open up this particular vendor, Best Floor Care. Here's where the federal tax ID is identified. So in this case, if it has pound signs, that signifies that this is a social security number. And within the software, only the 4 digits will be displayed. So if a user wants to view that, they just click view, Tasks, View Social Security Number. When a user is entering in the data, it's recommended to use the dashes in between. If dashes are not entered, it'll automatically identify it as a social security number and input the dashes for the user.
Will it, what if it's, well, the corporate is the same length as the social security number, right?
Right, so that's why you have to enter the dash.
Oh, okay, good. So if you're entering a corporate, you do 2 digits and then the dash and
Correct.
the remainder. Okay, great, thank you.
Yep. Then you're going to enter the tax classification through the drop-down menu. Next, you're going to come over here to section 6. These items, these fields here are related to the 1090, most of them are related to the 1099. The W-9 required and the W-9 received date, this is just informational for users to keep track of that data. It is not necessary to input for 1099 reporting purposes, but it is a good feature to utilize. These next 2 fields are related to the 1099 statement. So here with 1099 field, the options are yes and no. So this will signify that the vendor is a 1099 vendor. So this field is important. The 1099 form box, this is where if a user is wanting to identify this specific vendor to a particular box. However, if you have a vendor who provides services as well as merchandise, well, the merchandise, you're not wanting that to be reportable. Therefore, what we're going to do is we're going to select 0, and in the component value setup, we're going to identify that specific object code, so that way the system knows only to report costs tied to that object code to be reported on the 1099. And we're going to go over the component value setup in just a bit. So just to recap, users are able to use 2 ways to identify if a vendor, which box a vendor is going to be reported on. So they can use the field within the vendor setup and tie every payment made to that vendor to this particular box, or they can use the component value setup and have different payments be reportable. Next, give me one second. Next, down below, under the addresses, this is what's identified on what's going to be reported on the 1099 as far as the name and address. Notice here I have 1099 column. In this particular situation, we have a vendor whose checks are being made out to Absolute Floor Care. However, on the 1099, because this vendor is being reported as an individual and has a social security number, we're actually changing that the name printed on the 1099 will be April Smith, and the 2 slashes signify a hard return. So the next line will read DBA Best Floor Care, and then the address. So this field here identifies or signifies and tells the system to print this address on the 1099. And a lot of, it is recommended if you want to use this attachments, you can actually upload the W-9 record here within the system so it's easily accessible. Okay, so that's the setup of the vendor record. Now we're going to go over the account component setup. And as I mentioned before, within the vendor record, as long as the 1099 form box is set to 0, it will signify that whatever account component is set up for that vendor to be paid from, that's what box will be printed on the 1099. So let's go take a look at what that looks like.
Can they have multiple, could they have multiple boxes being filled out based on what's been paid to them?
It is possible to have multiple if they use the account component.
Right, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Cool. That's great.
So setup, chart of accounts, and account components. And the examples that I'm providing are based off of New Mexico chart of accounts. However, the object code setup for California, it's the same objective. So you just identify which components need to be tied to that box on the 1099, and then you set that up. So in this case, we've set up these object codes to be reported within these particular boxes. Let's look at diagnostician. So here within this field, Form 1099 box, this is where you're going to identify what box it should be reported on. So here in New Mexico, what we linked it to is any cost associated with ancillary is being reported to medical payments. And then all professional services are box 7. Rents are box 1, and so forth. And for New Mexico, we've already identified certain object codes to be linked to the boxes. So if you would like your system to automatically be set up so you don't have to manually modify each object code, please submit a ticket to support and we'll get that taken care of for you fairly quickly. And then for California, we can also assist on getting these set up as long as we have the values to associate with that particular box. And you will also need to submit a ticket to support. Okay, so now we want to be able to identify, well, what is tied, if we are using the component values, how do we know what's being, what is set up? So one way is you can look at the list that is identified here. You can sort. Oops, I'll just sort again. You can sort and from here you can actually export and just make sure that this is correct. Or another way is you can generate a report that's going to give you that information. And that report is the Rec Pay 16. So let's take a look at what that report looks like. And as we're not going to look at the detail of this report up above yet. We're going to cover that in just a bit. But what I want to point out is down below, I've identified, these are the identified object codes that are tied to box 1, box 6, and then box 7. So now let's look at this new feature that is available on the system, which is the TIN verification. To do that, what you're going to do is you're going to go to Processes, Tax Reporting, and Vendor 1099. Give me 1 second. Actually, that isn't the right place. I knew that. The right location is under Vendors. So we're going to go back to Vendors. We're going to click Tasks, and we're going to click Create TIN Verification File. Yes, and then it's going to give you the option to save the file.
Jolene, does that show just 1099 vendors or all vendors?
You know what? I'm not sure about that, Bart. Can we mark that as a question to
Okay, I'll write that down.
follow up
Thank you.
with? Okay.
Yep.
Now we're going to start looking at data. And users can actually start working on this piece since now, and that way when they process their final AP batch, it'll be that much quicker knowing that the vendor setup is correct and the account component values are correct as well. So what we're going to look at is we're going to review data within the list, and then we're also going to look at a report. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to make sure that the calendar year is open. And to do that, we're going to come to tax reporting and 1099 reporting. And so one way to tell is if you do have a prior year open, which is 2017, open is going to identify that there's no data within the filing sent. So if that is the case for you, you're going to want to contact customer support so we can get that taken care of. Otherwise, in this, this screen is showing that 2018 is open because there is no data within the filing sent within 2018. So the first step is we're going to look at creating the list. So we're going to now go to vendor 1099. We're going to generate for 2018, and it should populate some data for us. And so from here, this is a list of possible 1099 vendors. So what I like to do is I like to get this paid amount closer to the vendor name, and I also like to get the status. So these are the fields that I tend to look at most often. And then I also like to look at the problem description. And so once I get my list together, I can sort within any of these column tabs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort by tax ID. And notice I have quite a few vendors that don't have tax IDs set up within the vendor record. However, it is possible that maybe these individuals were paid, but they were for a reimbursement. And the other thing is most of these are below $600. So just by looking at this list, I'm able to identify possible problem vendors that I'm going to need to research. So in this situation, there's this first one, ACSL. I'm not sure what this is for. So being that it's over $600, this might be a vendor that I want to look at their W-9 and then also look at what type of payments are being made to this vendor. Next, what I'm going to want to look at is the status. So I'm going to sort by status. And within the detailed instructions, I have identified below what the status stands for. So I'm going to move it to my other screen, and I'll go over them now with you all. So printed means that these vendors are going to receive a 1099. They've met the threshold and they are marked as yes on 1099 filled within the vendor record. Next, I'm going to want to look at turned off. So what this is saying is the vendor record 1099 was set to no, but these vendors were paid with a component value that I set up within the system. So some of these I may want to look at just to make sure that if they should receive a 1099. Next, we have these ones that are identified as under minimum. So these are the ones that have not met the threshold. However, if you have a vendor that's duplicated, there might be a chance that they may have two payments that make them exceed the $600 minimum. So we still want to take a look at these ones. And so one way to catch if we have multiple vendors is we can export this into Excel by clicking export. And it's going to, it's telling me here of what the percentage is completed. Okay, now it's complete. And so one thing that I could do is I can come to the address and see if I have any vendors that have duplicate addresses. So I'm going to select duplicate values and click OK. I want it to format with this default. So I'm going to scroll down and see if I have any duplicates. So far I do not, but that doesn't mean that I don't. I still want to be able to look at some other ways. So another way could be on the tax ID. And currently I still don't. And you still may want to look at this information more thoroughly just to take a glance at if any of these ones might be listed up above. And since I don't have many, that wouldn't take me too long. So those were some of the ways that I've identified of how I review the data to make sure that it is accurate. There are some other reports that we can generate that we're going to go over now. And then I'm going to show you how to modify a vendor record as well as importing. So the reports that I've identified and set up within my report favorites is the RecPay 08. However, I've identified different ways or different search filters to help me identify any possible vendor problems. So we're going to go to favorite reports, or report favorites, sorry. And I've named mine with 1099. So I'm going to click go. And so every year I'm going to have these same reports available to me. So what I'm going to do, I've already generated these reports and wanted to show you some of the things that I'm going to want to look at. So this field here where it says 1099, this is noted within the, if the component is marked as a 1099 vendor or 1099 box. However, here on, I shouldn't have marked that. On this field here, this is saying that that vendor is set to 1099 no. So I may want to look at this vendor to see, should they really receive a 1099? And in this case, I know it's the city of Albuquerque, which is exempt, so I will not look into that one. However, down below, I may choose to look at this one. Okay, so now we've reviewed data by looking at the different lists and sorting through that, as well as generating reports and identifying possible vendor problems. Now we're going to look at how to fix any errors that we've discovered. So some of the ways is we're going to want to edit the record, we may need to add, and we'll show you how to import. So the first step is we're going to look at modifying the vendor record. So let's go back to tax reporting in 1099 vendor. So we're going to go ahead and open up this particular vendor because I've discovered that no, they should be reported. So we have this quick link here under the vendor code that I'm going to click on. And it's going to take me to the vendor record within purchasing and vendors. And from here, I can modify the information for this vendor. So I'm going to mark this vendor as yes, they should receive, and their tax code is 12. Enter enough. Oh, why isn't it letting me? Oh, because I have to add change social. So I'm glad I showed that. So if we need to add or change the tax ID, we need to actually enter it in by clicking on the tasks option. I think it should only be that right part. Yeah, okay. So then I'm going to select yes, 1099, and then I'm going to select the box. And I'm saying it should be reported as 7. Save and close. So now notice that within section 1 of the non-employee adjustment, that amount paid to that vendor is now going to be reported in box 7. And I'm going to click close. I'm going to click on search and go so that way we could see that this vendor is now, well, I have a problem with the TIN number that I entered. So I'm probably going to need to go fix that. So if I wanted to fix it, I would come back here to this open link or the quick link and then fix that record. Another way that you can add a 1099 record to this activity is by clicking on the new button. I'm going to enter the code. And then I'm going to enter an adjustment. I'm just going to put correction. And then I am going to enter other income adjustment of 100, we're going to put $600 and save and close. Oh, I'm already on the list. So it's not going to let me add another vendor to this list. So let's add a new. And I'm going to come in here and add. Okay, so now this vendor, it's showing that this vendor is marked as the status is turned off. So if I wanted this vendor to be reported, I'm going to need to go to that vendor record and set the 1099 to yes. Next, let me just come back to my list here. I showed you how to edit. I showed you how to edit the vendor record, how to add a new record. And now we're going to look at how to import a record or records. So to do that, we have all of the templates available within online resources and tools. And then you're going to click on Import Templates and 1099 Import. So let's see where that's located. So we're going to come down here to Online Resources, Tools, Import Templates, and 1099 Import. And it's going to have when I open it up, it's going to provide me with the template that has some data already in there, just for an example. And I am going to open up the template that I plan to use, since I already know these vendors are set up in the system. So one thing that does have to that we do have to do is on the vendor ID, we do have to modify the formatting so that way the system imports it. And because it's a CSV file, it does not retain this formatting setup. Give me 1 second. Okay, so now to do this, we're going to right mouse click and we're going to click Format Cells. And I'm going to click Custom, and I'm going to enter 6 zeros. Okay, and it's going to format it. I'm going to save this. I'm going to close the record. It has to be closed before you import. Then, then from the 1099 vendor, I'm going to click Tasks, Import Data. And I'm going to select this file. And it was successful. So it brings me back to the search screen. I'm going to click Go. And the way I can tell which ones have been imported is we have this column here that says Import Amount. And I have these 2 records that were imported. So these vendors were already within the grid. What I did is I added amounts to these vendors, so that way in total, the amount to be reported is higher. So whenever you do an import, say I needed to import another batch, whatever batch I import again is going to override the first one. So you're always going to want to make sure that the final one that you're importing has all of the changes in that template. So we went over how to import, and I noted down here that it will override the original file that was imported if you want to import another one. So this does come in handy if you are a mid-year implementation or have to make multiple changes to uh, a significant amount of vendors. So now I want to show you how to view a 1099 report directly from the vendor 1099 screen. So from here we have this little snapshot. If I click on it, it's going to show me how that vendor is going to print, how that vendor's 1099 is going to print. So let's go ahead and look at the one that it was best floor, because I knew that one had a different name and I had the hard returns. So the hard return is bringing that second line to the right below the name. And this is not the official 1099. Notice that the social security number only has the last 4 digits. When we actually print, then those numbers will appear. This is just for review purposes. Okay, so now we looked at fixing any errors, how to add records, and how to import. Now we're going to look at printing and submitting. So as part of that process, we're going to print, we're going to distribute to the vendors, and then we're going to submit to the IRS. So to generate 1099s, that is going to take place within tax reporting and 1099 reporting. Let's go take a look at that activity. So tax reporting, 1099 reporting. I'm going to open up to the 2018 record. And notice I have one problem. So it's not going to let me print until this is fixed. So I'm going to come back to vendor 1099. And it's this one here that I modified. So I am going to edit. And I am going to edit the vendor record. I thought I was going to be able to get away with it, but I cannot. So I'm going to have to fix this before I continue. And I'm actually just going to change this back to no. Oops. And save and close. And close. So now I'm going to come back. I'm going to just do a search just to make sure that error cleared. And it did. So now I'm going to go back to the 1099 reporting. And let's go ahead and close this and reopen. And so my problem is gone. So now I'm going to be able to move forward. So the next step is we have these reports that should be generated. So let's look at those. So this is going to tell me some signifiers here off to the left column, and the legend is down below. So the items that I'm going to want to pay close attention to is if it has this question mark, it's missing a tax ID. If there's a negative amount. But what this is telling me is these are the possible 1099 vendors that are set up. This doesn't mean that these are the actual vendors that will receive a statement. because some of these are below the threshold. They just are qualifiers. The next report these are the vendors that will receive a 1099, and it identifies the applicable box that they will be reported on. And this one in box 3, that one probably is not right, but that's something that we would want to pay close attention to and make sure that it is correct. But we're going to go forward and say this is correct. So I reviewed these reports, everything looks good. So now I'm going to print. So I'm going to click on this snapshot again and click on 1099 vendor forms. And so these here are the actual 1099s. Notice that the Social Security number is the full digit string. So when I come back to this listing, I'm going to show that all of them have been printed. But what if it's discovered that we had a problem, that I need to make a correction to a 1099 statement? From this task, I can unprint all of them, or I can come back to the vendor 1099 and I can open up this one that has been printed and click unprint. Open the record. I can click edit. Make the applicable change. Notice that the fields are now open. Okay, I'm done making the change. I'm going to come back to the 1099 reporting. And I'm going to close this and open it so it refreshes. Notice that I have one that's unprinted, and that's the one that I unprinted at the vendor 1099 activity. So I'm going to click print. It's going to generate that one vendor's 1099 statement. Now when I come back to the list, I have them all printed. So all forms must be printed before I can continue. So the next task we're going to actually generate. Let's go to the system and see what that looks like. We're going to click tasks. Oops, let me close and refresh. We're going to click tasks and generate. Yes. I'm going to open up the record again. And we're going to click tasks and download 1099 file. And this allows me to save the file to my desktop. So the deadline to provide 1099 statements to vendors is January 31st, as well as submitting them to the IRS. Here is some additional resources. We have the IRS documents that will be provided to you. I also have a 1099 cheat sheet. So let's take a look at what that looks like. This is just giving you some information of what type of payments are reported in that particular box. Box 6, box 7. And note that all attorneys, even if they are incorporated, they are exempt, so they must be reported. And then in box 7, All services performed by partnerships, individuals, or LLP are reported in box 7. I've included the W-9, most recent W-9, and I've identified the fields that must be filled out. And that if an individual includes a social security number, typically it's tied to an individual's name. So sometimes I've seen vendors submit their DBA name with the social security number. That typically will get kicked back by the IRS. And then one other thing is I've included a frequently asked questions. So restaurant meals versus catering, which get reported. So if you click on that link, it'll take you to that section. And then of course we have the tools how-to. And online resources that are provided by Escape, and then schoolAbility online. And that concludes the 1099 reporting process. Do we have any questions?
I have one quick one. When you said when you're doing the 1099 import, you said it'll overwrite the previous import file. Is that true even if it's it's different vendors?
It's true, even if it's different vendors.
Oh, so it wipes out anything you've done prior?
Yes.
Okay, that's good to know.
Okay, I don't see that there's any questions. If you do have any questions as you're going through the process, please feel free to reach out to schoolAbility support. The webinar recording will be posted early next week, and I will follow up with an email with all the support resources, as well as the PowerPoint and the detailed instructions. Thank you.
Thank you.